Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is finally here, and it is the 28th film into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which gives me the opportunity to rank all the 28 films from the worst to the best. So, without any delay of time, let's start with number 28, Thor the Dark World. This is not only one of the worst MCU films, it is one of the worst superhero movies of all time. At least for me, I absolutely had no fun watching it. The story was bad, the writing was bad, the villain was bad, and the whole third act was a snooze fest. So yeah, it was definitely not something that was, at least for me. I don't know if there are any Thor the Dark World fans out there. That would be crazy if there are, but I absolutely hated this film. Number 27, The Incredible Hulk, another movie that I absolutely don't like in the MCU. It also doesn't feel like an MCU movie anymore. And well, the director of Incredible Hulk is getting to direct Fast and Furious 10, so that's a weird thing. But anyways, this movie is bad, at least for me. Number 26, Iron Man 2. Again, I really didn't care for this one either. This is one of the right now we are on the bad movies in the MCU phase. And this is of course one of them with disappointing writing as compared to the first film. Number 25 is Thor. A lot of you are fans of this film. I understand this movie is not as bad as Thor the Dark World, but I would still consider it to be one of the bad movies in the MCU. I mean, it just feels very simple in tone, and the whole purpose of this film is not really well, established. So I actually did not care about this film at all. Number 24 is another film that I absolutely didn't care for, Black Widow. I was expecting quite a few things from Black Widow. I mean, I was excited for Black Widow. The trailers were great, but the movie turns out to be bad. I mean, David Harbour was a clown in this film, and Taskmaster was such a disappointing villain. The action sequences were not even impressive considering it's a Black Widow movie. They need to be bang awesome, but none of the action scenes were impressive, and the whole third act was so bad at the VFX, and it just went too far. Number 23, Iron Man 3. I think this was, in terms of spectacle, I think it was a good film. But when it comes to disappointments, this movie had massive disappointments in it. And Shang-Chi, a whole movie had to be created so that we can forget this mistake. And still, nobody is going to forget that MCU actually ruined the actual Mandarin plot twist in Iron Man 3. And that was that is the actual factor that makes this movie so bad for me, because Mandarin is such a great villain and he was just ruined here. Number 22, Captain Marvel. Again, an MCU movie that still I consider in the bad tier. I really don't, there's no rewatchability factor for me to Captain Marvel. There are a few good moments here and there in third act when the power explodes of Captain Marvel, but overall the third act was weak, and this is not that great either. It just feels like another MCU film with no distinctive style or substance. Next up on my list at number 21 is Ant-Man and the Wasp. Again, another forgettable MCU film. In fact, one of the most forgettable MCU flicks will be Ant-Man and the Wasp. I enjoyed the film, but I would still consider it to be bad because it just has no rewatchability factor. And I never think about this movie when I'm sitting alone, and I think about a lot of the other MCU movies, but this is, at least for me, the most forgettable MCU movie. The villain of the film Ghost was so bad, one of the worst in the MCU. Next up at number 20, Spider-Man Homecoming. I know a lot of you are surprised because for a lot of you, this movie would have been quite high on your list, but it was not for me. I really did not enjoy it as much as a lot of others did. I didn't care for Vulture, and that's controversial. I know, that's very controversial, but I did not. And the third act of this film is one of the worst MCU has ever delivered. So yeah, as you can see, it was a good, when it comes to Spider-Man lore, yeah, it was okay, but not really for me. Number 19, Captain America, the First Avenger. Now these are the movies that I would consider to be good movies, at least not like medium, normal films. In Captain America First Avenger is just less enjoyable. It has some really good messages here and there about the origin of Captain America and all that, but yeah, it still doesn't work when you compare it to the rest of the MCU, which is just so really expanded into so many other dimensions, and this movie just seems inferior in front of those. Number 18 is Ant-Man. Enjoyable film, I would say. Better than the second movie that was Ant-Man the Wasp. Ant-Man is at least a good movie, I would say. It brings this new character into the MCU, and all those things that are introduced with it were quite impressive. I mean, see, who wouldn't like to see him go smaller than ants and all that? It's just really nice. It's something different in the MCU, some different superhero, and I liked it. However, again, I really did not care for the villain of the movie. A lot of you did, but I did not. And again, third act was weak. Number 17, Eternals. I would say Eternals is not really bad a movie. I mean, Eternals is still good. At least for me it was. But the main problem here is that this movie introduces us to 10 characters. Literally 10 characters, and none of them are given the screen time they need to develop their arcs. And that's the whole problem with this film. We just don't get invested in any of the characters of it. It was just a convoluted mess at some points, but still it was a spectacle enough to enjoy. Number 16 is Avengers Age of Ultron. It is again the weakest Avengers films, but I quite enjoyed it. Especially the third act was bang, amazing. Because of the spectacle, again, it's because of the spectacle I'm appreciating this film. Story-wise, not so much. Especially the villain Ultron is just not as good as he was in the comics, or nothing as compared to Loki in the first Avengers films. This has better action sequences, and it's more fun to watch, I would say. So that's why it's higher than Eternals on my list, even though it's not as good as the first Avengers. Next up, 15, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Again, another example which is not as good as the original Guardians of the Galaxy movie, but still it was a spectacle. It was a stunning film. It is one of the most beautiful MCU movies, I would say. Even more beautiful than the first Guardians of the Galaxy, because the visual effects here are some of the best I've seen in the entire MCU. I absolutely loved the planet Ego. I absolutely loved the villain Ego. It's just not as comedic, and it has lost a bit of the touch of the first film. And that's the only reason why it's so far behind, because it's forgettable when you compare it to the first film. When I think of Guardians of the Galaxy, that's what I think of. Number 14, Doctor Strange. A movie that introduces us to a whole new dimension in the MCU, in a mirror dimension, a whole new side of the MCU, and it's pretty good, I would say. Except for the third act again. It's a unique third act. I appreciate it, but they need to have something to balance the I have come to bargain scenario between Doctor Strange and Dormammu. There was nothing to balance that out to give us a feeling of satisfaction after watching the film. So that was the problem here. Number 13 is Iron Man, the movie that started it all. It's a good movie. It's a really good movie. And I give it the credit of starting everything all. And it is a really nice origin story for Iron Man. In fact, that's what makes this movie really nice. But still, at least for me, it didn't connect me like the way a lot of other MCU movies have. Number 12, the brand new entry into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. A lot of you say that this movie is the most Sam Raimi MCU film. It feels like a Sam Raimi film. I don't think so. I have a controversial opinion over here, and I can elaborate, because I think that any horror director, MCU could have picked any horror director and would have said to make a movie like this, and they could have made a similar film. It's not that only Raimi could have made this. I superiorly disagree on that one. This movie also has a lot of messiness in it, but at the end of the day, it is so good, so epic, and the visual effects and 3D effects of this movie are so good. It was a spectacle to be enjoyed on the big screen. I cheered more than any MCU movie, save for Infinity War and Endgame, and I absolutely loved this film. Number 11, The Avengers. The first time a studio proved that you can create a successful cinematic universe, and it was with The Avengers, which is one of the highest grossing movies of all time. And this whole idea of seeing it, I watched it. I remember watching this in 2012 in theaters. I mean, at that time I was still a kid, to be honest, and still I enjoyed it. I was laughing and I was cheering, and I really liked this film. Now that I look back into it, it's still fresh and alive, but not in the top 10. Number 10, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. This movie, to be honest, this is so high up on the list just because of the action sequences and all the spectacle it offers again. But it has an equally good amount of story to balance that out, unlike Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. It has a really nice world that it presents us and amazing action sequences that that took me on the edge of my seat. So I absolutely like this film, but still I was not really invested in the characters. Number 9, Spider-Man Far From Home. Again, I think you might think of this as way higher than Spider-Man Homecoming. And again, I agree. A lot of you like Homecoming, and I don't have any problem with that. I respect your opinion, but for me, this was a better film because it entertained me way more than Homecoming did. And yeah, it doesn't feel like a Spider-Man movie. That I would take that. Of course, it doesn't feel like a Spider-Man movie. It's Mysterio and all these big scale things that are happening. But still, I liked it. Number 8, Captain America: The Winter Soldier. This is the MCU movie that takes itself the most seriously, and that's what I love about this film. The Russo brothers bringing their own style, and like it does not have forced humor in it like a lot of the other MCU movies put forced humor in their movies. It goes against the MCU formula, delivering something that is serious and dramatic and really enjoyable at the same time. It has a really great story. Number 7, Thor Ragnarok. After watching the first two Thor movies, I had absolutely no expectations for Thor Ragnarok. But then they said that Taika Waititi is going to direct the next Thor film. And then it came out and I was surprised. I was absolutely surprised by this film. It was bonkers fun. It was epic. Yeah, it does not have any sense. It has forced humor in it, but it is intentionally so. I absolutely loved the movie. It is bonkers fun and rewatchable multiple times. Number 6 is Black Panther. Again, I really like what this movie represents. I mean, the entire message about resource utilization in this film was really well done, and MCU could use such messages in other films too. That's the reason why this movie was an Oscar contender. It put family dynamics, resource utilization, and it was a phenomenon for the Black community. So yeah, I really appreciate this movie for doing everything, and it has some really nice action sequences in it too. It's not like it doesn't feel like an MCU film. It does. Number 5 is Spider-Man No Way Home. I think this movie is very rewatchable, and it's emotional and it's fun all at the same time, having a lot of problems with it. I'm not going to go deep into my problems of the film, but despite those problems, this movie makes me smile, makes me cry, and it's just the most fun I've had in a movie theater in the entire year. So why not? It's definitely one of my top 5 favorite MCU movies, even though I acknowledge that there are serious problems in the movie. Like, damn it, there are a lot of them. It's like forced writing and unnecessary plot elements and some plot holes too. But I can ignore them. It gives me the fan service it did. Number 4 is Guardians of the Galaxy. An absolute surprise, the most surprising MCU movie. I mean, I did not really know these guys, but James Gunn, he understood the task of creating a bunch of weirdos and making them assemble a team, which is the weirdest team you have ever seen in a superhero movie, and he absolutely rules with this movie. I mean, this movie was just bonkers. It was so fun, it was so comedic. Absolutely loved it. Number 3, Captain America: Civil War. At least for a superhero fan, I can say and it gives me immense pleasure to watch some of our favorite superheroes fight each other. And this is what this movie gives us exactly. Captain America against Iron Man. And it's a joy to watch. Oh boy, it's a joy to watch. Especially that airport battle and the seriousness of Russo brothers from the Winter Soldier movie. Everything mixed in in this film, as it was a pleasure and it was memorable. Number 2, Avengers Infinity War, the best MCU movie. Now, why did I call it the best if it's not my number 1? Because I think this is the best MCU movie, but it's not my favorite. Yeah, that's what it is. It's the best MCU film, but it's not my favorite. It's my second favorite, as you can see. It had amazing action sequence, amazing cinematography. Oh my god, the Titan battle, it was bonkers. It had amazing pacing. This is the way a movie should be paced. Perfect pacing, and the way all the characters assembled each other at different places was just some of the best plot development I've ever seen. But number 1 is Avengers Endgame. As I said, it's not as good as Infinity War, but at least for a fan, the fan service element still counts. And this movie delivers fan service. It delivers handful of fan service. In fact, it pours fan service filled of buckets on us. And I just poured everything inside me. I just allowed everything to pass through me, and it became my favorite MCU film. So that was my ranking for all the MCU movies, from the worst to the best. Share your own ranking in the comment section down below.